Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Welcome to another solocast, guys. This is Dr. Stanton Hom, and I am on the tail end of a week trip to Maine, and it's good to be back. It was awesome. It was a net positive. If you read our last newsletter, if you read my last blog and watched our blog, you know that I reminded those of you who've been following this podcast, one of the big things that we went through in 2020 was this entire conversation of whether or not my oldest was going to meet her great grandmother, who we were fresh off of the passing of my wife's grandfather, and then right before my daughter was born, my grandmother passed away, and then my grandfather passed away. I want to say like in January. Alana was born in August. And so it was huge, right? When it came around to 2020 and we do our annual trip to Maine in August, it was a huge conversation on whether or not we were going to have my kid, who was the youngest in the family tree at the time, meet the oldest in our family tree. And it was a huge deal also because my wife's great grandmother is a daughter of the American Revolution, and my wife's aunts are daughters of the American Revolution, and my wife is a daughter in the American Revolution, and my kid is a daughter of the American Revolution, and that's kind of remarkable because my kid, if you've seen pictures of her, she looks exactly like me. And we have daughters of the American Revolution who have lineage all the way back to our founding fathers and mothers of this country, and they look like me, right? And it's a cool testament to this amazing country that we live in, and so they got to meet, and it was a moment where I was, I love my grandmother-in-law, Grandma Gigi, we call her. And ever since I met her and ever since we visited her in her home in Cape Cod, where she doesn't live right now, she's on hospice, from looking at all of her books to seeing their family tree to seeing basically her handwriting out the lineage all the way back to the Mayflower, it strikes a chord in you. It strikes a chord in you on what heritage is and what legacy is. And honestly, I don't know how to turn that off in who I am as a man, who I am as a husband, who I am as a dad, and who I am as a leader in this movement. I can't shut that off. And so some people sometimes come at me thinking I take life a little too seriously, and I think about those things, right? I think about my mom a lot. And I think about the devotion that they have, so much so for our family that they uprooted themselves in their 70s, and they moved to Memphis, a place where politically they're polar opposites, and to live with my sister and her family, and they culturally, socially couldn't be more opposite to a lot of degrees too. And in many respects, it's been really hard at that stage of life for them to adapt, for them to change, and for them to really compromise a lot of the things that they have grown to know are normal for them, especially as they've lived amazing lives, being able to have a successful business. My dad in optometry, practice of 40 years. Like I get a lot of my bedside manner, and a lot of my devotion to the business from him, and I think about like the fact that they sold their optometry building to the person that bought their practice, and it was a huge transformation, which that led to the 1031 exchange that allowed us to be in our office today. And so the ability for me to practice in the city that I am today is, a testament to my dad. I have a picture of him buying that office in the 70s. And I just remember 5810 Temple City Boulevard, North Temple City Boulevard. I remember the address. I remember everything about it. I remember the water cooler. I remember messing up all the file boxes. I remember being a kid in that office. That largely is maybe the seed of the kids that just do so many things in our office today, and live the dream, if you will. Like, a lot of times we come out and we're like, our office is run by toddlers, and that is so foundationally important and totally related to everything that I'm talking about, in a sense that as I was sitting there watching my kids meet their great grandmother, it made me think of my great grandmother. And my great grandmother lived to 103. Grandma Gigi is 99. And we celebrated her birthday on Thanksgiving Day this year. My wife and I, fun fact, had our 5th wedding anniversary on Friday. And it was a moment where I just, with my great grandmother in hospice, and I remember, and now just my kids visiting their great grandmother in hospice, basically a centenarian pushing into that 100-year. And I just put my arm around her and I just said, I want you to know how much we love you. And I want you to know how much we think of you and how much we live today to honor you. And I said that because we just got prefaced, what to prepare for going into this exchange. And I remember not my great grandmother. I remember meeting my wife's grandmother, Grandma Gigi. And I remember just thinking about how you do it. How do you get to that stage of life? How do you have that like vigor and fire and zeal for so many things, right? And I think about my mom, and I think about my great grandmother, and I think about how my grandparents came over. My grandfather came over, 5 men on my dad's side. My grandfather, his older brother, his younger brother, future brother-in-law. They were not married yet. They were betrothed. They were not married yet, my grandfather and his wife. And then their 2 fathers, right? My grandfather's father-in-law, so my great grandfather's 5 men came over. My grandfather was a teen, faked his name, fought in World War II. And it was one of those, I still have the picture. It's something I look at often. And I don't know what that's like. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to flee tyranny, right? I don't know what it's like to sail across the ocean, across the world, to America on the Mayflower. Religious freedom, freedom from the tyranny of the Queen and the Crown, and start something. Plant the seeds for what is, essentially the foundation for the fabric of the free world, as we see it today and as we benefit from it today. And so I say this all on this aside, right? Because there's going to be some of you who are so awake to the things that we share on this podcast, right? Like there really wasn't an American Revolution. There was 2 sides that were funding both sides. There was one, elite that was funding both sides back then. Yeah, I get that. All right. I know how to navigate that. But at the core of the experience, we'll always go back to people. It would always go back to the human experience. And it's why every time I do an interview, every time I interview Dr. Larry Pilevsky, who released last week, and I will say this clearly, the best interview that I've ever gotten to be a part of, Joel Salatin, the godfather of regenerative agriculture in America, in his 60s, talking about the same thing, remembering when he was a teen, remembering when he was 30, and remembering the legacy that he now holds in his hands, which chiropractors call the sacred trust of the thing that was bestowed upon you, the blessing that was bestowed upon you, on which you get to serve the world, which Joel Salatin was the legacy of the farmland, that he talked about how it had nothing, it had weeds. And he remembered the moment in time where he saw a little sprig, he said about a sprig of red clover in a sea of weeds. And he said to himself, oh, we got this. Like, he saw that spark of life. All he needed was one piece of evidence that in the sea of weeds, that life, that healing of the soil and the earth could happen. And now he's got 1,000 head of cattle. And now he's feeding 7,000 to 8,000 families from an idea, from a dream, from a possibility. I'm humbled by that. Every single day I'm humbled by that. Because I don't care where you are in the world today. I don't care how awake you are today in the world. What I know is that you don't know, and we don't fully encapsulate and recognize the infinite number of things that have had to have happened just to lead you to who you are today. And just the opportunity at all to live a life of freedom, live a life of possibility and potentiality, to live a life that is of service to humanity, to live a life that you hit a domino and it literally decades later is the dream. And I'm humbled with the fact that as much as I've shared, whether it's on our newsletters, our blogs, or on this podcast, or my platforms, which I'm a little bit stale on right now, because I love long form. I love this. I love the ability to share in longer form. I don't love the clickbait. I don't love the swiping and the scrolling and the weird, like, attention grabbing bullshit. I don't love the fleeting nature of social media, or the fact that even the closest people in my life know shit about me. The most important people in my life have never taken the time to understand even close to what we've been through. Me, my wife, my kids, my team, my business, our community. Because we don't have staying power, I kind of double down on the fact that I can and will continue to do longer conversations here. Because if you're listening, and if you're listening at this point, right, what is it, 13 minutes in, you're at least with me this far. But I'm humbled to the fact that sometimes all it takes is an idea. And the idea plants a seed of potentiality. And that one sprig can pop up, that one sprig of red clover can pop up, and it gives you evidence that you are about to, in a short few decades, right, in the grand scheme of life, in the infinity of time, a few decades is nothing. But imagine, right? Imagine. I am so inspired by Joel's interview because I sat there pinching myself. One, because it's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream to me to interview him. If you haven't read his book, there's so many books that you should read. If you're in the homesteading kind of journey, Polyface Micro is an incredible book. If you are just in the interest of, like, not knowledge, but wisdom, right? The wisdom of normal. He wrote a book that I read, I want to say 10 years ago, and it still speaks in my heart, where the title of the book is Folks, This Ain't Normal, right? The Folks, This Ain't Normal. And we had a conversation about that. We had a conversation specifically because we have two young kids. And he said something in the book that I wanted to ask him about, that he shared a little bit more about. And he said, there's no surviving society in the world today that believes that any child is a liability. That every child who exists in any unit of any surviving, sustaining culture is an investment, is an asset, is something and someone and a being of infinite worth and value that contributes to the cycle of life upon their birth and upon navigating the journey of life, to the point where as soon as they can pick eggs out of your hen house, as soon as they can start the process of being a part of baking bread, until they can like start to measure different spices, and they can be taught certain skill sets, that they become an inherent infinite worth and value part of that cycle of life that is your family unit, that largely doesn't exist in the quote free world today. Right? In the health freedom movement, we are just as automated. We are just as, viewing our children as liabilities. We are just as anti-normal as much as we claim to be totally normal. The videos that come out on our platforms over the next week and 2 weeks are going to be about birth. We talk about that so often, and people ask me, why is episode 2 Stu Fishbein, right? Why do you interview an OB in the first few episodes of your podcast? Why do you interview midwives and doulas? Because you're going to have babies in the freedom movement, and most of you in the freedom movement, the health freedom movement, don't know a lot about birth. Most of you who understand informed consent as it relates to shots and injectables don't understand that the onslaught and the attack and the removal of informed consent happens long before a baby's born. And it's so automated, right? It's so automated. I was watching 1923 on the flight over here, and I've already seen it. I freaking binged it a year ago. And it's such an amazing series, right? 1883, 1923, and Yellowstone. And this talks, like, they go to the city, right? They go to Bozeman, and they walk by a vendor, and the vendor has a washing machine, and he has a refrigerator, and they're talking about electricity because it's the invention, right? They're inventing this new modernized way of living. And one of the cowboys says something really simply, and he just said, so you sell us the electricity, but you rent to us the equipment that we then use the electricity with. For what? To them, it's like weird, because they're so self-sustaining. And he says, so that you can live leisurely, you can have a picnic. And he's just like, it's so counterintuitive to these cowboys and to these men who literally build everything from nothing. And then you hear an aside where I can't remember her name. I think it's Kara Dutton. She says, well, that washing machine might actually be a good thing, right? Because that is inherently generalizing at that stage a woman's job back then. Why do I even talk about any of this? Because electricity isn't anything that we even think about anymore. We don't think about the fact that electricity and gas, we plug our stuff in, but we're plugged into the grid. And we know that, hey, when you get off grid and solar and all the things that make you sovereign, you unplug from that matrix, right? But we don't also see the other aspect, right? The other aspect of how it became an infrastructure of society. Mechanistic birth is an infrastructure of society. 99% of births happen in the hospital. 1% of births are midwifery based. Even in smaller fraction are 1% are home births. And I believe midwifery care in the hospitals, it gets to somewhere now, I want to say 17% or something like that. I could be wrong on that statistic. And then you get into the whole regulations of certified nurse midwives and midwives in the hospital who actually have to abide by hospital regulations that don't often fly in synergy with the midwifery model of care. Why does this matter? Because the numbers don't lie. Because today, even in a quote progressive and holistic county like San Diego, a third of our births happen via C-section. And we could go into the realities of them, that C-section rates go up on Fridays, that C-section rates go up at the end of the day. And largely, I could send you videos of routine C-sections, and you hear the bedside manner of the doctor talking about the fucking Yankees game or something like that, right? Why do I care about the Yankees? I don't. But some hospitals in the fine city of New York have C-section rates as high as 90%. 90%, 90%. There are some birth activists that are actually OBGYNs, one specifically by the name of Michel Audant, a French obstetrician who's, I believe, in his 90s. I would love to interview him. I don't know if I actually ever will get the opportunity. But he wrote a book that basically said, we are epigenetically programming out of our species the ability to actually birth vaginally because of how common C-section delivery is. And this is not to say that some C-sections don't save lives, and it's not to say that some C-sections, especially with some of the best OBs in the world, can actually be healing for mothers because they actually, in the process, are rehumanized, and they are given informed consent, and they are seen, heard, and valued and empowered through their decision process, that the C-section with the right provider can actually be radically healing for the trajectory of that mother and their births, right? So it's not a shot against the system. It's just to say that because we talk so much about birth trauma, I wanted you to understand the gravity and the bigger picture of why we do. We do so because it literally is relative to all the things that I've been talking about. What legacy are you going to leave your kids? And one of the things that my wife and I know we are going to, as much as we can, is we're going to leave a legacy of home birth, empowered birth, conception to postpartum as optimally as possible. Why? Because when my daughter, by the age of 1.5, 2 years old, memorized several of her home birth books, she just knows it's normal. And when she sees her new friends, the babies that are born in our community, and they hear, oh, you know what? This family is going to have their baby with Vicky. Vicky was our midwife. To us, that's like, it literally can bring a tear to our eyes. Vicky Gervais, one of the most amazing midwives, inherent part of our family. And if you've had a baby with Vicky, you know that you see Vicky as an inherent part of your family too. That it's so countercultural to what is socially accepted as normal today. It's socially accepted as normal today to hire an OB or an OB team knowing that you will not ever actually birth with that OB, that you'll go to a hospital system with no guarantee that the person that was giving you care throughout your prenatal care would ever even be a part of your birth or postpartum. It's totally normal today that there's an entire system with inherent interventions, right, that are some as minor as a blood test, as ubiquitous as a ultrasound. The highest rate of causing autism are ultrasounds, by the way, in the research, not my research, PubMed research. But no one talks about that. But all the way to the tests that are inherently implemented to check to see if there are birth defects so that you can then have a conversation about terminating your pregnancy, which one of our team members experienced. She just went. She was super stoked about her birth, right? And she goes into a routine visit and they just say, hey, next visit, we're going to talk about termination. Super nonchalant, just as it, like if something's up, then you can talk about termination. It's like, whoa, how have we come so far that what we view as chiropractors and as natural health providers and as birth advocates and people who are about this optimal expression of life and potential, um, our red clover sprig, right? Our red clover that Joel Salatin saw, and he knew evidentially that he was onto something. He knew he was healing the soil of his farm that was decimated, desolate. And he saw that one sprig of life, like that movie Wall-E, where that robot finds a sprig of a plant and it takes it, seals it, and it knows that it's programmed to then tell the world that we found evidence of life on Earth. That our sprig are your kids, man. Our sprig of life is the literal 2 half cells upon conception that in 9 months, the miracle of a mother's body transforms into a 26 billion human being that we call our sons and daughters. And the birthing process alone in conventional settings and even in peaceful settings, the research shows in peaceful settings is traumatic. And this is not a shot against mothers. Some things in nature are traumatic, right? Mentally, physically, spiritually transformative, but also potentially traumatic. And no one looks at it. Dr. Ryan and I sit back in a lot of videos, they sound so much of the same. It's like birth trauma, stored and stuck tension and stress and subluxation in the upper cervical spine, vagus nerve dysfunction, dysautonomia, all the same terms over and over and over. One, because on repeat, you then might actually plant a seed, then take action on that. But on the opposite end of that is a really important factor that when you take that 30,000 foot view out and recognize that when we call ourselves future generations, whether it's the podcast or whether it's the practice, we can't not see your kid as friends, best friends, future boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, spouses of our kids. And that if we don't invest all that we can to help them express their fullest potential of life, from the moment we meet them all the way through the end of their life, or as long as your relationship with us is sound, then what do we actually believe in? So when it comes to those videos that are coming out in the next couple of weeks about birth, I want you to know that it's far more vast and far more deep and far more beautiful, and the possibility of finding the right provider. And if you're a free birther, that's you, I love you. I appreciate you. Be all in on that process, because I know that we aren't at this point of our lives. And I know over 13 years of taking care of mothers through this process that it is not just a physicality, hey, you are made to do this. It is a consciousness change, that it's a remembering and an uncovering of the infinite potential that a mother's body has to birth a child that I don't see many providers, especially never in the system, continuing to affirm and empower into moms. And without that, oftentimes that's where we see that trajectory change off of what that birth plan, that birth values, that birth preferences, that birth expectations, that birth journey. We start to see a trajectory change. And in that trajectory change is what we call subluxation. It's what we call stress stuck in the system. It's what we call trauma that actually gets stuck and stored in mom and baby. And we find that we are some of the best in the world to help reconcile that. And when we do, and we help reconnect that baby to its infinite nervous system function, then what we have are those miracles that we expect every day. We start to see babies and kids who are nonverbal speak for the first time. We see the 24-month-old take their first steps for the first time because they were told they were never going to, or they were told that, it's just normal to be delayed. Or we start to see those delays start to catch up, but then also over time, our moms start to verbalize to us, hey, are my kids ahead? And that's normal for us because we say, no, your kids are not ahead. Everyone else is just behind. Everyone else is just behind. We've normalized abnormalcy. The CDC is so authoritative that they start to delete milestones. And we start to think that there's some sort of logic behind that outside of the fact that they know shit about neurodevelopment, neurobehavior, and they're going to continue to normalize abnormalcy. Why? Because it's going to be take these pills. For what? Forever. And like Dr. Larry Pilevsky said recently, that pharmaceutical medicine and Western medicine have become unanimous. They become it's not unanimous. They become similes. They become the same. And because of that, it's the end of Western medicine. I'm excited for him because he's on a journey to reteach pediatric Western medicine in a way that he was taught to do it holistically. And on Stu Fishbein, as we talked about him earlier, he's on a mission to reteach what he called reteach breach, because breach was never an emergency until the early 2000s. An erroneous study came out, and then laws globally started to come out saying that breach had to be C-section delivery. When Dr. Stu Fishbein has a less than 2% transfer rate and less than 2% C-section rate, and he specializes in home birth, twins, and breach. Can you think of anything more, quote, emergent than that? I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you. And I'm excited at the opportunity that exists on the other side of you hearing this and you taking action on it. If you're still in the world of having kids, share this with someone and then become partners in the journey of finding the right people and the right team. If you're not, share this with someone that you know that you can empower and be a part of their journey and empower them in this process of doing things counterculturally that is outside the social norm today, which is just mechanistic, technocratic, industrialized birth. Do so because our kids matter and because every single one of your kids is a friend or best friend or future spouse of mine. And I love and appreciate you for leading them and for being a parent and father and a mother to them, especially if you're empowering yourself through this birthing process. Genuinely love and appreciate you all. Enjoy this episode.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations Podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.